Here we go. Okay, so the meeting has been called to order and we'll look now for approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Okay, moved by Tim, seconded by Sharon. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. So the agenda has been approved as presented. And the first item is ESIC review with Suzanne White.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to give you some background on the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation for because I think there's a neat story to tell, starting back in 2010, when the provincial government took a bold and innovative action to deal with poverty reduction in the province. And basically, they carved out a new crown corporation whose sole mandate was to focus on the issue of poverty reduction. Rather than having it passed from portfolio to department to changing of ministers, this was going to be a dedicated workforce with one focus of activity. So they also very wisely got all party consent for the setup of it, so that that support would continue even with changes of government going forward. The responsibility is to come up with a provincial strategy that gets renewed every 5 years. And we're now on the cusp of starting up another community consultation to come up with Overcoming Poverty Together Plan 4. So ESIC kind of wraps its arms around those big issues on a provincial scale. So for example, they look at policy development, and currently they're looking at revisions to social assistance reform, changes to the Employment Standards Act, and the reviewing government programs, services, and tax policies targeting low-income individuals and families. And then they also get involved in the program development side. How can we best deliver services for folks on low income on a provincial scale? So they were movers and shakers when it came to getting the Healthy Smiles Clear Vision program established, such that kids on low income could get free access to those services. They put together the 211 one-stop service. That's the biggest concern for most people, to say, you know, I need services, but I don't know who to call. Now they can call 211. A person's on the other end of the phone that can help them navigate through all the different social services that are available. And they have backup support because it's a national program, so they can deliver it in 170 different languages, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They promoted volunteer tax clinics. Again, folks on low income weren't filing their taxes, and that prevented them from getting certain benefits. So ESIC has done work on encouraging folks to attend by doing super clinics where there's a combination of different services and getting free tax services done. As well, they've been promoting the Canada Education Savings Program. So that's free money for kids to be able to invest in their education after they graduate from high school. If you're kids, you've got to apply to and know what. The other thing that ESIC does is try to build capacity in the community. And in that regard, they've done transportation symposiums to bring together leaders in the industry to understand what's happening, being innovative. They also took the lead on developing the Services to Services report, which was an analysis of what the regional transportation system was in the province, and trying to understand where were the gaps and what are some of the services that could be put in place. So that's on the big scale. And what they also appreciate is they needed a grassroots response to poverty reduction that engaged the 4 sectors: business, folks on low income, government, and the service organization. And so with the staff of 5, you kind of look around the room and figure how we're going to do that for the whole province. And what they did was divide into 12 different regions, and then searched out a host agency that would take on the responsibility for translating a provincial poverty plan into a regional plan for that area. And within the Fredericton area, with Greater Fredericton Social Innovation, that put their hand up and said that they would be the host agency. No worries.
It's already been a week.
You could-
Monday morning, it's already been a week. Yeah, okay.
You could give this presentation.
Yes,
so
okay.
You help me fill this.
So I really am sorry.
So they started off with Greater Britain Social Innovation, who in turn creates a community inclusion network board with representatives from the four sectors to come together and take that regional plan and work with community groups to implement it. To help facilitate that, they do offer grants. So each year there's $50,000 that's available to access to support work on the grant. That's helping to advance the overall poverty agenda. 50,000 is not a lot of money. And so our approach has always been to say, how can we be a first funder in on some pilot projects, some innovative work, and then as first funder in help organizations leverage other money such that they can go knock on the door of United Way or Frederick Community Foundation and say, here's an interesting project, and we already have 5,000 to help us get launched. So that's how we strategically tried to position ourselves so that we could help as many groups as possible. As well, there's $50,000 annually to advance transportation solutions in the community. So presently, we're working on the Overcoming Poverty Together Plan 3. And what they've done strategically was to focus on specific areas where they thought they can make the most advancement. And so it revolves around promoting social enterprise as a mechanism for developing sustainable community organizations, as well as looking at ways to try and improve access to mental health services, which is a key concern in the province these days. Providing inclusive opportunities for folks through sports and recreation, and that's helping to build people's pathways to social inclusion, because it's through that social inclusion you can also build other relationships that help you find those pathways out of poverty, that helps open up other doors to other opportunities. On the food security side, the focus is on supporting school food programs and appreciating that about 3 years ago, we were the only province in Canada that was not investing in school food programs. And so there's a lot of work there to be done to try and respond to growing needs in the schools, and appreciating that hungry kids are kids that can't focus, can't succeed in school learning. And the final one is implementing accessible, affordable transportation services. And what's been unique to watch happening over the years is the growth of the volunteer drive service across the province with the other regions. And most recently, we've been successful in helping launch services in Commonwealth, Cambridge, Maryland, and Montreal, in Maryland. We've been meeting in Grand Lake this week with community groups that are stepping forward to say, we'll take some ownership for helping provide a service to seniors who need access to medical services. And I think that's an upcoming with the creation of Overcoming Poverty Together Plan 4. So in January, there'll be discussion starting to happen on what are the current priorities and how can we translate that into a provincial strategy that we then embrace and translate into the regional. Just to give you a bit of a taste of some of the things that we've been working on. We kind of have two levels. The GFSI has taken the lead on some projects and activities, as well as communities, organizations taking lead. Under that category of GFSI projects, and this is just a smattering of different things. We recently concluded a 2-year pilot, providing research for Health Canada on a project called Marketplace, product market that we delivered at the library. And it provided access to subsidized food for folks who had compromised health conditions. GFSI is also taking the lead in creating a common voice to promote basic income as a strategy for dealing with poverty reduction. I mean, why are people poor? It's they lack income. Why can't people feed themselves? They lack income. Why can't people afford their rent? They lack income. The social support services just don't, are inadequate to meet the needs of people right now. And I sit as a member on the Atlantic Canada Coalition for Basic Income Now. And currently we're working with Liberal MPs to create a cross-sectoral response in support of a pilot project that's being proposed by the province PEM. And they've done, pretty 8 to 10 economists who developed a study that said, here's how you could implement basic income in PEM. We could do that test case for the country, or pick another area as well too, if you need an urban setting, but we're ready to go now. We've done the math. We know how this is going to work. And so we're going to galvanize, like saying action, raising awareness about how close we are to being able to deliver a product for the federal government to have done. I'm also a member of the National Coalition for Healthy School Food, and we've been advocating with the federal government for a national school food policy. And we're the only G7 country that doesn't invest in school food, either as by creating a policy as common standards or by directly investing into school food programs. We've seen significant progress in that file under Minister Gould. And there is hope that either in the fall update or the spring budget, we're finally going to see some funding for school food programs that will roll out across Canada. And we've been working with provincial government to the next step is to figure out who's going to catch the money and actually get it spread out in support of schools. I mentioned earlier that on the school food file, the province had not been an investor, but 2 years ago they did invest $2 million in school food programs, and in an innovative way, they contracted with Food Parliamentaire to focus on school food procurement. So rather than just passing the money out, they said, how can we give the money out, but have it spent in the most efficient way possible? So schools purchase school food. Food Parliamentaire, who leverages their contracts to get best price points. GFSI is also involved in, as I mentioned, the volunteer drive program setup. Another project is Fredericton Food Rescue, which is basically gleaning excess produce that's left over in the fields and getting it redirected to food banks. We've been very active with a program called Community Food Smart. We started it here in Fredericton. We spread it out to about 10 different locations in the Capital Regional Service Commission. And it's a bulk food procurement customer-based program. So the people can pay $15 a month. We collect all the money, and then I go shopping and buy fruits and vegetables at the best points I can get from wholesalers, from local growers whenever possible. And we've helped set up Community Food Smart in other locations around the province as well too. On a grand scale, we looked at ways of building capacity in the community, appreciating that nonprofit organizations need support to do the good work that they're doing. We hosted an event called Partnering for Impact, which brought nonprofit organizations together to have a discussion about where their needs for service support. As well, we hosted another event called Day for the Ages, and focusing on the needs of seniors and understanding what service supports they required, and finding ways to promote volunteerism for seniors as well too. So that's GFSI, the SIN, taking the lead on some projects as well. We have community-led projects, investing in mental health programs, financial literacy, affordable housing, community gardens and food skills training, the school food programs I mentioned, and volunteer engagement. As well, we're a member of the Tamarack Institute with Communities Reducing Poverty, which is a national organization that looks for ways to share best practices and learning opportunities to help build up capacity for all of the agencies that are supporting poverty reduction work. So what happened recently with local governance reform is that the contracts that ESIC had with all those host agencies was rescinded. And now that contract is with the regional service commissions. The community work continues. Agencies are focused on their mandates, responding to needs in community. And I think the role of the service commission is basically to try and find out how can we best support them in their efforts to do the work that they do and help them to see some opportunities through a regional perspective on the work that they do. So that's basic in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. And again, I'm sorry, everyone, that I was late getting here to start the meeting off. I'm assuming you called to order an approved agenda, so we will proceed with agenda. And we have, we're about 1 minute before 11:20. I don't know if we want to maybe provide a couple of minutes just for some questions of Suzanne, if it would be appropriate.
And I have a couple of closing comments too on this topic.
Okay, however you want to proceed. I mean, we can go to questions. I also think a lot of what's been discussed will probably be carried into our brainstorming, because
Yes.
presumably we'll build on some of the work that's being done. But maybe let's start with questions and then go to you.
Sure.
John. Is that okay? Okay, anyone have any questions of Suzanne?
Well, it's more of a comment than a question. I, as a counselor in Ackwick since 2016, I sat beside Gail. And I kept hearing once in a while about ESIC, and I heard it talked about here, and I don't have any idea what that's about. I was interested since 2016 on public works and waterfront development and a few other things. So yesterday I looked it up, and the part that surprised me greatly was the reduction in the number of people who are considered to be in poverty in New Brunswick over the last few years. It was a huge reduction. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I know what's going on in Ackwick with all of these things that you mentioned. And I thought, well, Gail was doing that. And she did it and she's still at it. So not only did I learn something, but I think it's very, very important. So keep going.
Thank you.
We should go to just make sure that anyone who's online, I think Amy, if she has any questions.
How do you see this one? Okay. I didn't see Amy. Amy, you're good? Okay, anyone else? Okay, there being none, Dawn, why don't you?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think the members can see that, it's quite a broad field that the SIN has been working in, and which has been transferred to us. And there's a number of initiatives going on. And so from a staff perspective, what I would like to do it'll help indoctrinate me even more, but for the committee as well. We have the year-end ESIC report that we'll distribute to you, but it's kind of cold on its own. And so we'll try and do a staff overview, provide some detail. Suzanne has many, many balls in the air, and she's very good at keeping up with that. But one of the things that I think that we owe you are a number of a number of quick summaries for each of these initiatives, like maybe 2 paragraphs, what the initiative is, where we are right now. And I know that will help you understand the breadth of the initiatives that we're dealing with. And as we come into the next process with ESIC developing Overcoming Poverty 4 and this year's review of our agreement with ESIC, we're going to need some direction from this committee with respect to that. And so we want to educate you on that and as well. So we'll be working hard on that between this meeting and the next one.
Thank you, Don. I also think we are going to need to have a discussion about breadth versus depth.
Sure.
How much versus how deep we want to go. And again, I know the brainstorming is going to inform some of that. I've always felt personally that ESIC has had, I mean, I've worked for the organization and always very ambitious goals because there's much need, but never really the capacity. Like you've had to always pick, right? Like there's always been the sins depending on their community and where they assess the need have always had to pick where to put the focus.
Yeah, we tend to go with,
Yeah.
where is the energy in the community?
Yeah,
So.
let's build off of the energy that
Exactly.
exists in the community. So I think we just will need to have a discussion. Is that how we want to continue as we give direction to this position? But again, I know I think they're all topics that we'll be discussing in our brainstorming session. So this was a nice tee up for that. Thank you very much, Suzanne. And now we will move to our regional transportation overview. And that's you, Brett. You're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Suzanne alluded to the fact that another one of this committee's responsibilities is regional transportation. And I guess the first, just to provide some context, I thought it would be useful to go through a jurisdictional scan, a very brief one. I've summarized it obviously, and we have more details available. But the first point that I would like to make, obviously, the Capital Region Service Commission is in fact mandated by law to deliver regional transportation service within the boundaries. So that was written into the Regional Service Delivery Act last year. And so now it's just a matter of figuring out how we do that and how we do that in a way that's consistent with the strategic plan and the goals and the action items that were identified within it. So to start, obviously, it's a relatively new concept, regional transportation for the capital region. But I think it's pretty clear that we can learn some lessons from the other jurisdictions around us that have already implemented similar programs. And while I'm speaking, Cheryl, I apologize in advance. I'm focused. I am not ignoring you over on this table. I'll try to shift over, but to be honest, I am reading a lot of this from a document I put together earlier. So when we talk about regional scans, there are two main jurisdictions that were looked at, and this was done through by Pivot Consulting during the strategic development process. The first was Nova Scotia and Halifax. Nova Scotia is set up slightly different than New Brunswick. Obviously, there aren't regional service commissions in place. They do it on a county by county basis. So there are 21 entities in Nova Scotia that provide transportation services to the province using sedans, minivans, and small buses. In many regards, they're similar to what we see with urban rural rides. The big difference is that it's not a volunteer drive service. And so they've got paid drivers. Makes for a more robust system, in my opinion, but a more expensive one. And of course, the other key difference in Nova Scotia is they do receive substantial funding from the province to pay for that kind of a system. Those services that are offered by those 21 entities for regional transportation are connected to Maritime Bus and its system to facilitate intercity and interprovincial transportation, as well as park and ride locations in the city of Halifax and to integrate the system with their urban public transit system. The 14 park and ride locations in Halifax are all but one are free of charge. One involving the ferry, there's a monthly fee associated with it. But the goal there is to facilitate the introduction of the passengers to the bus rapid transit lines within the city of Halifax. The goal of those bus rapid transit lines is to get as many people into the city without introducing a large number of private vehicles into an already congested urban core. So it makes a lot of sense. Key word in both of those points is integration. And so we really have to take, or they have chosen to take a bigger view on how to integrate that regional aspect with the already existing urban transit and interprovincial transit systems. Now, as I noted before, that system is largely paid for by the province. It's also paid for by municipalities. And interestingly, and this is was a key takeaway. It's partly paid for by private partner or sponsorships through companies within their respective regions. Which I thought was an interesting twist and a way to sort of keep costs down a little bit for the taxpayers.
I'm just going to interrupt, Brett. Do you know the provincial municipal contribution percentage? How much of that rideshare program is provincial?
I don't right off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that answer for you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Listen, and by the way, if anybody has any questions through Madam Chair, I'm happy to take them during the presentation. Now, that's a high level summary, obviously, of Nova Scotia and Halifax and the state of play there. The other jurisdiction that was somewhat analogous to ours was the Southeast Regional Service Commission, including Moncton and Dieppe. So when you look at what's going on down there, Urban Rural Rides is already providing regional transportation services throughout the region. Maritime Bus provides the intercity transportation and interprovincial transportation. And Kodiak Transpo provides urban public transit, and that would be for the city of Dieppe and the city of Moncton. Accessible transportation in that region is also available through the urban transit system only in Dieppe and only for Dieppe residents. And accessible vans are anticipated to be rolled out regionally. And so the Regional Service Commission in that area has already put in an application to the federal government, and I believe it's approximately a 50-50 cost share for accessible vans. The application that's currently in progress that are being looked at is for accessible vans for each one of the municipalities within the region. So each municipality would have access to their own van dedicated.
No, you have to include a driver, a paid driver.
Excuse me, no, it's volunteer drive service.
For the accessibility part. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for anything
Service.
involving, yeah, and so those accessible vans, those would be operated by Urban Rural Rides, and the same way the non-accessible regional transportation program is operated. So it'd be an extension of that Urban Rural Rides program. The one item that I would note here that it would seem to be a key difference between Nova Scotia and Halifax was the lack of significant integration between intercity, regional, and urban transit. And so that would be a potential area for improvement versus that model.
I'm going to interrupt you again, Brett. I'm sorry because
Sure.
I'm confused. I thought you said that the Kodiak bus service and Maritime Bus were doing the integration of the urban rural ride.
No, so Kodiak Transpo provides urban transit services for Dieppe and Moncton.
Right,
Maritime Bus operates completely independent of them.
right.
And then Urban Rural Rides appears to operate independently again.
Oh, okay.
So there are these three players in that space.
Okay.
Yeah, all of which seem to be operating somewhat independent of each other.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a key difference between the Halifax, Nova Scotia model, where they've managed to integrate all those transport services together.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Papua Region Service Commission. So within our jurisdiction, there are currently no regional transportation services in place, although Urban Rural Rides, and Suzanne alluded to this during her presentation, Urban Rural Rides do operate on a community by community basis. And so there's obviously some community interest, there is some demand at the community level for this service. However, it's not in place at this point on a regional basis. Maritime Bus Services provides intercity transportation, just like they're doing in Southeast New Brunswick. And Fredericton Transit and Fredericton Paratransit Services provide public transit. There are no accessible transportation options outside of the city of Fredericton currently. And no significant integration of intercity, regional, and urban transit. So both of those areas would be areas of potential improvement within our region. So that's the jurisdictional scan. I'll go through this quickly. I won't give you all of the points that were identified in the strategic plan, but the strategic plan did in fact identify some regional transportation action items and goals. And the key action items could be summarized with collaboration. So collaboration with stakeholders within the communities, and collaboration with existing public transit options. So that would be the City of Fredericton Airtime Bus.
Does that, you said collaboration between or within the community? I think you said within.
Between, well, with community partners, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, so we would have to, and I think that's verbatim from the strategic plan. I think the idea there was to collaborate. It will be a volunteer drive service. And so that's where you need community involvement. You need people within those communities to be partners in order to recruit these volunteers. Promotion of intermodal transportation connections and ride sharing to enhance regional mobility is another action item. And last but not least, research and explore alignment with the future of transportation, ensuring awareness of topics such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure, ride sharing apps. So now the goal is a little simpler and more concise. The goal that was identified within our strategic plan is a connected, efficient, and sustainable transportation system that meets the needs of residents in terms of accessibility, affordability, and availability, and supports economic development while reducing environmental impacts. So how do we get there? What gaps did we notice when we compare our jurisdiction to the other jurisdictions that we looked at? And the key gap was the absence in our region of a regional transportation system. So we've already got intercity, maritime buses serving that. We've already got urban. City of Fredericton has a very successful program already through its Fredericton Transit. So how do we fill that space, that regional transportation gap? And on thinking of that, I mean, the logical first steps, I should say, would to not only comply with the existing provincial legislation, but as well as, also implement those goals that were identified within the strategic plan, would be the implementation of a regional volunteer drive service operated by Urban Rural Rides to serve seniors, people with disabilities, low-income families and individuals, and newcomers. Initially, this service would prioritize transportation for medical appointments until sufficient numbers of volunteers have been recruited to expand that service beyond that critical need medical appointment type role. The second key point, and again, these are starting points, would be to collaborate with existing public transit in the City of Fredericton to integrate regional transportation solutions with urban and intercity transit. And so that would be investigation of park and ride locations, and on discussions with the city, there may be other opportunities to collaborate and further integrate the various levels of regional transportation. So since this is a matter of policy, there are obviously no recommendations from staff at this point, but wanted to bring that to the committee's attention for discussion, review, and consideration. Chair, happy to
Thank
take
you.
your questions.
Yes, yeah, I will entertain questions. Thanks so much for that, Brett. I have my own questions, but I'll open it up first. And Amy, see you online.
So I certainly support the Dial-A-Ride rural ride programs. I was participating in one in the Sussex area back about probably almost 13 years ago now. But one of my concerns is the sustainability of it. And also in the New Brunswick context, the Energy and Utilities Review Board has a lot of regulatory influence over transportation. So I'm kind of curious how that works in the Nova Scotia context. And also I'm wondering, as Suzanne had mentioned earlier, promoting social enterprises, this idea that maybe business, small business that we could help to get running and then offer subsidies might be a better approach, or kind of a novel pilot to take instead of just a straight volunteer service, which is going to need perhaps about $2,000 a month or more in subsidies. So that's all. Thanks.
No, excellent points. But do you have a response for any of that?
Sure, Madam Chair. As far as I'm aware, Amy, there are no requirements to the Energy and Utility Board within New Brunswick. Well, I wasn't made aware of that during the, when we were looking at this type of system last year. But certainly we'd look into it and make sure that we were compliant with any rules or regulations that they may have. Regarding recruitment or encouragement of new volunteer or businesses to start up. Certainly if a company had a proposal for us, I mean, that's something that we could look at. I know currently though, the big player in the game, yes, there's Dial-A Ride, but Urban Rural Ride seems to be the standard that's being rolled out in the province of New Brunswick. And all I would say on that is it's important that whatever system that ends up being recommended to the board for consideration, it would be somewhat consistent or compatible with the existing programs that are out there in the province right now. And again, Urban Rural Ride seems to be the standard at this point.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes, Tim?
I'm wondering what the provincial government share is.
Thank you very
So
much.
especially in terms of like urban transport, like
Mhm.
does Fredericton receive any money from the province? Why not?
You tell me. I mean, I will say the province opted out of there were federal funding opportunities and our
Mhm.
province opted out of them, as we are likely aware.
Madam Chair, to the best of my knowledge, New Brunswick's the only provincial government
Yes.
doesn't contribute to municipal urban transit.
That is, yes, you are correct. And I'm finish up. I'm gonna talk more about that too, Tim. So,
Yeah, I think, I mean, that was really probably my only question when it came to that, because I'm just wondering what we're dealing with. It just seems odd to me that each individual region is doing individual work on transportation when it's clear that it's needed, especially for folks on low income. And so I don't know. It just kind of boggles my mind. So I need to get my head around now what our role is and how we need to deal with that.
thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just add or comment on what you said, Tim. There is some funding right now. It's a different funding model than what is available in Nova Scotia, but and probably more limited, I dare say. When I looked back this morning through the budget documents that we put together last year, ESIC, there is some funding through ESIC for these types of programs. We're talking, I think for last year it was approximately $50,000. There is some potential cost sharing through, and forgive me, and John, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there's some cost sharing coming from the province on some of our newly mandated services, I know, for this year. And I don't recall the name of that particular program.
The Regional Services Support Fund.
Okay, yeah, so through the Regional Service Support Fund, there is some funding available there as well. So we wouldn't be on the hook entirely for the full cost. The other dynamic of these volunteer ride programs is that there is a limited cost recovery from the users. Keep in mind, the majority of these users are low income. They don't have their own private vehicles. And so the vast majority of the ridership do not pay for the service. It would be fully subsidized. But I believe in the budget estimates that we put together last year on 6 months operation, so I'll just double it to annualize it. You're looking at a limited income of probably $30,000 to help offset costs on top of the funding that you receive from ESIC, as well as the additional funding that we'd be receiving in the near term from the province.
Yes,
All
continue.
more questions?
Yeah, no, you go for it.
So I have two more questions. The first one is with the Nova Scotia model, you talked about businesses and sponsorship. And I guess my first thought was, well, what's in it for them? Like how much sponsorship are they putting in and what is the benefit to the individual company?
It would vary by county, but the benefits, I think, would be pretty clear, you know, I mean, this is a positive program. In communities, and not only in small communities, but in larger ones. There's interest amongst seniors, I know, has been expressed recently within the city, but also obviously recently in Grand Lake. It is a positive program and companies want to be associated with that. You also have a ridership on a regional transportation program that on average, they're going to be in that van for 30 minutes looking at your advertising. So, I mean, in some respects, sort of tongue in cheek, you've got a captive audience. But I mean, a very positive program and one that I think a lot of businesses would be happy to be associated with.
My last question. So one of the issues that I see, and it came up at the transportation symposium as well, was the idea that we need a cultural shift. So that we're a car culture and a truck culture and do a lot of driving, and how do we make that shift? And so, I mean, I think part of what we have to consider here is how we do make that cultural shift and how we get through to decision makers who are automobile drivers and have maybe never used a transit system in their lives. And how do we get them to understand how this works? So again, just maybe a comment more than a question, but I see that as a real issue, is the cultural issue.
I would say to that, Tim, that you're absolutely right. And recommendations that, I wouldn't say recommendations, but the options that are presented to the committee today are only a piece of the puzzle. They're not all the pieces to the puzzle. They're just some of the key pieces that we're missing right now. You're right, big picture, that would be a challenge. And I suspect that there are staff within the city of Fredericton that have already worked on the promotion of transit. That would know that how to deal with that type of a challenge, or at least where to start in addressing it. So, I mean, we do have resources within the region and within our member communities that we can draw on, and I think that, you know, that was you know, stressed within the strategic plan. That was one of the goals, is to cooperate with our member communities. So, yeah, that would be something we would find.
Yes. Go for it.
I have an idea how this works up where I live, and it's the volunteer. And it's, so somebody has to phone, probably Gail Farnsworth, a former counselor who just lives and breathes this stuff. She's out around town at 8 o'clock in the morning. She donates time in her own gym. That is a money losing proposition. So she's a special person, but I have a concern about the sustainability, because who else will have her commitment? And so, but we have, you know, you phone Gail and you say, I have an appointment in Fredericton or in Waterville. And so then she arranges the volunteer and the car. And there's a little bit of money that goes to the driver for the car and they fuel. And I presume that comes from a grant, probably from the program that you mentioned a while ago, because I don't know where else it comes from.
Currently, it
It's
would
good from ESIC. It's
ESIC,
ESIC funding.
yeah.
Yeah, which is
So,
like it's.
but anyway, in terms of the Regional Service Commission, there must be a way that you deal with like just organizations. The Wellness Committee, which does all this stuff, they're not a committee of council. And although the council supports it in several ways. But I'm wondering, is it municipalities that the Service Commission deals with? But you must have the ability to deal with organizations. So what quality of organization what quality does it have to have? Does it need a board of directors? Does it need insurance? Does it need a lot of things in order for the commission to deal with? So I'm just wondering whether going to transition to dealing with municipalities only. And it's up to the municipality to kind of somehow oversee this kind of work in the community. There's a lot of questions.
I think that's a very good question, or a series of questions. The, currently, and Don, you'd probably be better suited than me to.
I can do that.
The urban
Yeah,
rides.
to speak about the criteria that we may use.
Yeah. So one of the things that we noticed when we first sort of came in contact with the SIN and it became a responsibility of ours. I remember John describing to me that conversation he had with Suzanne where he asked her how many organizations are active in our region in the social world, and her answer was something like 300. And so one of the things that we need to do as we identify through our brainstorming sort of the initiatives that we can support, as the chair said, we need to talk about depth as well as breadth. We're obviously not going to be able to get to this wide field right away, but there are already people and organizations that are active in this area and have a lot of volunteer capacity and experience. And part of our job will be to identify those, reach out to them and ask them to help us form the advisory group or constituency that can help inform this committee. So we're going to have to do a vetting, and we're going to have to be concerned about what it is. You talked about key people, key person risk. So I always want to know my customer. Is my customer a loose collection of people who are interested in the area? Are they a registered nonprofit? So you have to do some due diligence about that. And you have to match your relationship to the structure. So if you have a bunch of individuals who are collectively interested in an area, that kind of constrains formal agreements that you can make with them because they're not an actual recognized entity. And so we will need to be aware of that as we go through and vet our counterparties in all of these areas. And they run from the key person to the very formal structured GFSI, and they're across the whole range.
And our licensing, I'll add to that. It's one of the reasons that we don't have urban ride, like the equivalent of Ubers. The type of licensing that's required in our province is also more stringent than in other provinces. So they're asking us to take on something where they provide none of the enabling legislation to support it. So it's really it's classic, but anyways, it's very interesting. If we're 15 minutes over, so on this agenda item, I don't know. I have a few points I'm going to make, but I want to, do you have any more questions? Okay. So what I was going to suggest, so this whole transportation file is so huge. And I think the biggest challenge that I see facing us is the sustainability of this kind of a program. We're saying how important this program is, and we're putting it on the backs of volunteers, a lot of it. And I really question the sustainability of that. I also, it is as you all know, it's so expensive. So the transit system that we run at the city of Fredericton, it's extremely expensive. The vehicles are expensive, the insurance is expensive, the gas is expensive, the paying people to do it is expensive. And that is if we accept that potentially doing it on the backs of volunteers isn't sustainable, then there's staff required. There's such an expense required. And I think that it's really irresponsible of the province to put this on regional service commissions without appropriate funding. The funding that we're talking about cover maybe a week worth of transit, like it's nothing. I would suggest that maybe where we could have the greatest impact is doing advocacy for the province, that our initial work on this potentially is going to be advocacy to the province to be funding it properly, because anything else that we do will be very piecemeal and I fear not sustainable. Even when we talk about park and ride, Fredericton would love to help run a park and ride program. Do you know how expensive that is? Like it's just to get the property and to run the program. Like we have had an infrastructure application project in the mix for almost 10 years to try to get a park and ride up on for College Hill, sort of running between Forest Hill, the highway there, is it Highway 10, I never know my highways. And I know exactly where it's located. I've seen all of the maps. It's been third in line for I don't know how long. And that's just to get infrastructure funding to build it. Like and that's after you get the land and after you get the approvals. And so at these, when we enter into this, we're talking a lot of money. And I don't know, I would like us to consider that one of our approaches being instead of putting all of our energies into the weeds, start big picture and say, help us fund it first. Maybe we price out what it actually costs. Maybe we work with the other regional service commissions who are undoubtedly grappling with all of this as well and say, let's do a province-wide. Let's figure out the actual cost of this and do a province-wide advocacy to get more money from our province on it.
And Madam Chair, I know that the province is working on a regional transportation strategy and they're a study that they have been undertaking. So there may be some information come out of that that will help inform exactly some of those questions that we want answered as well.
Yeah.
And I believe, Brett, that's close to being finalized, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, as I understand it.
Yeah.
For the next few weeks.
So maybe before we do too much work in this area, we wait and see what that says. I mean, as we go into brainstorming and as we prioritize our projects, maybe it's, we're not going to put too much energy into this until we see what the provincial objective is, right? And they can frame it up. But that would be because all of the things that have been mentioned, right? Like that's stuff that should be approached at a provincial level as opposed to regional service commissions doing it piecemeal, I would think. So, yes, Tim, yeah,
Sorry,
and then
just
we'll
one
move on.
last-
Sorry, Carrie, we're so
Well,
late with you.
I mean, it's my very firm belief that you don't do cost recovery on public transportation. So it's a money losing venture. And that's just how it is. And so I agree with Madam Chair that we need to, we can't do this on our own. It's just not going to be possible. It'll be piecemeal. It'll be, and people will be patting themselves on the back that, oh, we've made it this far, but it just won't do the job. So I think if we're going to do it, let's do it right.
With that, yes. Okay, so we will move on because we are running a little bit behind and we have the JPS resiliency overview, and Carrie, you're going to take us through that.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for the invite. I'll keep it pretty sweet, but I get very passionate about the line of work that I'm in. So I do tend to kind of run off a little bit. So please, if there's any questions at any point, please feel free to jump in. And so I love where this conversation has gone because it really sets us up well for this conversation of what we're doing here at Community Capacity and Resiliency under Justice and Public Safety branch of a GNB. So for those that don't know me, my name is Carrie Bedford. I'm a registered dietitian by trade, but I am one of 12 coordinators throughout the province that is helping to lead the work of our Community Capacity and Resiliency branch. And so this was something that is fairly new out of the pandemic, but it's been something we've been talking about or thinking about for some time now. Not to mention, what's just happened in Nova Scotia as an example over the weekend with their flash flooding. This is the work that we're trying to get upstream on. And so if you look at that response, we really are looking forward to building that social fabric in communities to help support in times of crisis, in times of flash flooding, in times of COVID-19 and things like that. So our vision really here is around, we want New Brunswick communities that are equitable, vibrant, and sustainable and resilient. And how do we do that is that we are on a mission to increase collaboration amongst New Brunswick communities, basically all partners, government, NGO, private sector, and we want to be able to build capacity, align efforts, and be able to measure these improvements in different areas. And so what Suzanne and Brenda talked about, it's all aligned. Really, my role is to kind of find our networks, have facilitated the space, and kind of give whatever tools or resources are needed to help invest in the community members that show up and help to lead these initiatives. And so the biggest piece for here is really building that community trust, one with our provincial government. As we've seen, that was the kind of struggle after the pandemic. We've seen, differences of trust levels with what our government is sharing. But my goal is really about bringing that community voice to the table. And I think in the next slide here, shows a little bit of our structure. So these are the 4 areas that we're really trying to target in terms of our high impact areas. So it really touches on many. So our economic security, employment, our housing, built environment, health, social justice, and education systems, as well as our environmental sustainability. So, and these are all categories that members of our steering committee are really targeting to help support that community resiliency. So over here, this is our structure. So you can kind of see in the yellow, I am one of the 12 regional resiliency coordinators, and I help to chair a committee of 12 of our Region 11 steering committee. And so the whole purpose of that committee is to come up with an action plan. And so we've been at this just about 3 years. I've been in this position a year at this point. And so every year we're funded through, we also have $50,000 to help bring partners to the table. This work is directly related to kind of supporting those high impact areas, like I mentioned, to help support that community fabrication. And then we see it on both edges. So provincial government hears from community, and community is able to hear directly from provincial government through the streams indicated on the left there. And so on our next slide, these are some of the projects that we're working on in this current year. So our funding year, basically it starts, we submit a strategic action plan in December. We are awarded it in January, so we choose a community partner. This year it was GFSI that helps to host our funds. And then we have identified members at the community that have come forward with an idea. They have partners to bring to the table, and they have these action items that they want to work towards. What we're looking for as we move forward is developing these long-term action plans, and there's so much opportunity for alignment. So not, we don't want to work harder, we want to work smarter with those that are in the region. And so really looking at it from a regional perspective. So this year we have 4 working groups, technically 5 working groups. Suzanne is one of our leads, and I can get into that process, I think, in the next slide of some of the projects that are happening. But you can see we're hitting at least 3 of the categories of those high impact areas. So a project that Suzanne has brought forward with partners from GFSI that is really kind of encompassing the whole purpose of where we're at is if you think of, the state that we're in, we all know our first responders are there in times of crisis. One thing that we've kind of steered away from, especially since the pandemic, is that we're in very much siloed approaches. Not many of us know our neighbors. We might know their furry friends. And so this was a project that she's working to develop to help enhance those people around us, our everyday neighbors. Because if you think in times of flooding, in times of Hurricane Arthur, or whatever that be, our neighbors are really our first responders in that. So being able to find a fun way to help administer just that community connection can help to, again, improve that fabrication in times of crisis. So that's a really great program that Suzanne has on the go. In terms of household access to food, we have a group of public health dietitians. We're working with Greener Village as well, partners such as communities and libraries. They're developing a SWOT analysis of our current state of food security. And this was coming from after the pandemic. We really didn't know who was doing what. There was so much food security outreach happening. We're aligning some of these efforts and working with Food for All NB. And this way here, they have the resources, the information that they've found so that it reaches, almost a provincial level, right? So we're able to really look closer at that regional picture. And then the other one is being able to support any of these assets. So we actually have a small pot of funding that was approved for this project that members can apply for to help support future food security projects. So that was just a glimpse of 2 of our projects that are undergo. And I think on the next slide, it talks a little bit more about where our next steps are. And so basically, as we kind of steer down, September is when our funding comes to the end. So we're just coming to the end of our Q2. In August 15th, we'll be hosting just a general community meeting. Anybody that has vested interest in those high priority areas that we've mentioned above, just a networking event. That's really where I look at this, is that we have a list of distribution members, some that are very active, some that still want to be informed. And we'll just come to the table to see where is it we want to go? Where do we want to point our arrow in the next year? In September, we'll have a formal strategic planning meeting and invite as many partners that are interested or have ideas to bring these projects forward. We'll submit an overview of this previous year, so get an update of where these 5 projects are at. And then in November, December, we'll submit for the following year. And so basically, as of January 2024, we'll enter a new funding year and have those projects aligned. So I just threw a lot of information at you. And so just wondering if there's any questions at this point, but even in those conversations around the transportation, food security, the work of ESIC, there's so much alignment opportunity even within our community developers and Horizon. There's a lot happening. So I'll leave it for questions if there's time.
So Carrie, I just want to verify or clarify, whichever. So there are 12 of you and you each work with one of the regional service commissions. So you're the person from JPS and Community Resiliency that would be working with the Capital Region Service Commission. So you're
That's
our point
right.
of- Okay, and
Yeah,
you work clearly with Suzanne, and maybe there are others of you in different departments who would do like work that would also align with the community development work that Suzanne does, right?
Yeah, so every region is structured differently. So there's some that have really strong relationships with their regional service commission, and some that do not. But our whole effort is really from, we have this network of people. We don't want to duplicate services. How can we help support the work that you're doing and find that opportunity for collaboration and alignment? And so, again, I would act as a point of contact for what we're doing as a branch, and also offer an opportunity. As a prime example, around transportation, that provincial support piece, convening the space for partners to come together to support that advocacy. And so what is it that's needed? Who needs to be there? Who's our stakeholders in that? And how can we elevate that voice? Because I have that direct line in terms of how do we hear this? What's work is being done across the province? And they can specifically look at each region as well.
So you would work like with the community development folks like out of Horizon, for instance. I'm thinking like Jennifer Hogan, like you would work.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to just see who are people where our capacity is beyond just Suzanne. So I'm hearing that there's people like, I think my knowledge is there are people who do not the type of work you do, but work in that sphere in various departments in government. So, okay, it's a great resource for us because one person here is not enough. So thank you.
So, Madam Chair, what I'll do is I'll circle back and Carrie and I will come up with, there's a distribution list for the resiliency committee meetings. And perhaps we share that with you, the individuals and the organizations. It includes departments and not-for-profits and community advocates.
Absolutely. And just to add into that, Dawn, thank you. The biggest piece of coming to this position after a year in, so Jennifer actually used to chair this at one point. There's been a couple of coordinators at the table since we've started. We always see the challenge of actually getting people to the table, right? And so especially it's a volunteer commitment, right? Or people need to have that commitment with their employer to join and help in that work. I see a lot of Fredericton focused happening. And we think of where urban meets rural. We really are missing that rural voice at this table right now, I would say. And I will say that I am biased in that sense, is that I'm a member, I live in Cambridge Narrows, and so from Arcadia, and I don't see a lot of, engagement around those tables as well. And so it's really about a matter of bringing us a whole region together, supporting those networks so that we really see that cohesiveness happening.
Right. Thank you. Are there any questions of Carrie?
Yes, I see in some of the slides, you mentioned resiliency and environmental, whatever. And I'm wondering if the results of climate change in terms of flooding can come into your area, or does that go someplace else?
Absolutely. So that's an excellent question. And I think too how it's worked at this, how we function at this point is we're convening. So we're recruiting people to come to the table, share their concerns, and help see if there's opportunity for that collaboration involvement. How can I pull a partner together to support another partner? It's kind of like our gives and gets system a little bit. To follow up on a question with that, I've been working with or connecting with a couple of our local watershed associations. And so that is their biggest concern is around supporting that through climate change. But again, there's other groups that are out there. We just haven't been able to convene them in the same spot. And so I think that's a very much a priority. It does link directly. If we think of what happened in Nova Scotia, you're correct, right? And the other piece to that on the dime is some of the work that I'm working on with these watershed associations is lack of resources. So they have a really hard time in filling the positions to help keep the work moving. And so is there capacity building that could happen amongst the different watershed associations in our region? Because we have well over 10 in our region. And so how can we share those resources to keep this work happening?
I'll be a little more specific in my interest in this because it's a province-wide problem, much like one of the other things we spoke about today. But I've been thinking about this for about 6 months, and yesterday I wrote down some things about what my community, first of all, do you want to deal with this? And I know that our road network, just look at what happened in Nova Scotia. And I live on a street that was wiped out twice within 10 days because of 2 localized downpours. But only served 4 houses, mine is one of them. But that was about 25, 30 years ago. But I know that DTI, there are thousands of culverts going under roads. They don't even know where they are. They don't know where every culvert is. And given the amount of rain that fell in Nova Scotia, 200 millimeters within just a couple of hours, there's no reason why that can't happen at any point in New Brunswick. And so what can we do to make sure, I mean, we would have to take Nackworth Mill, we would have to look at the whole watershed. We know where the brooks go into the rivers, but can they get to the rivers without wiping out roads, without flooding homes, without doing a whole lot of destruction? And this can be determined with an effort. Some of the information is already available because DTI has these maps, so they know a lot of information, but no one's putting it together for the purpose of trying to prepare our now larger rural communities to be able to handle this with as little damage as possible. And it'll take a pile of money, but it'd be cheaper than doing the repairs. And so I'm hoping to get my council to be interested in this enough to take some action. But the big question is, where do we go with it? Is it BTI?
Yes.
Is it this organization? That's the question.
So I would say, Carrie, it's probably beyond the scope of what you're doing. Your group would look at the fallout from that, like how to address the folks who were impacted. You would work on that. It would be DTI, I think, that would have put in place the projects necessary so that it's resilient. Now, does our infrastructure committee look at those kinds of things, or we're looking just at recreational infrastructure?
So our infrastructure committee is limited to, or in the legislation is targeted at recreation, culture, and sports. It is interesting as I look over on our strategic planning workshop, one of the things that the directors believe is the purpose of this organization is to amplify municipal something to the level of government. So should you bring it here? Well, yeah, I mean, if it's an issue that the board collectively thinks is important, and we have a classic example next door as to why, part of the role here is advocacy. So rather than Millville-Nackawik going to DTI, Millville-Nackawik can go, and CRSC can go, and Grand Lake can go, and
An example in Alberta was, well, we all know about the forest fires,
right.
but one of the communities that was threatened by a forest fire, 2 weeks later was threatened by a flood. you know, so what's gonna come?
If I could also jump into that as well.
Sure, Carrie, yeah.
Sorry, thank you. I think that's an excellent point because where this is a new position completely, and if you think about why is community development happening at JPS, we also are sister branches to EMO, and so we work very closely with our regional emergency coordinator, Dan Deklova, and so these are conversations that we're trying to mitigate of like what is my role in supporting measures in emergency. And so as coordinators, we have 4 key responsibility areas. One is our just general project administration, reviewing our annual cycle, developing a network, and then again, partnering and supporting EMO in times of crisis. And so I think where we might not have that direct link, or we don't have, we can't just wave a wand and make that happen. We do have the ability to find those partners, such as in DTI, finding those community people to bring them together to have that conversation of how do we move forward with this, and finding those people in community that are invested in making these changes happen. So it's kind of in an abstract way, we're here as a support and to connect, I would say.
Is there a U equivalent at DTI? Are there community like people at DTI?
So I'm not entirely sure on that piece, but even if you think of GNB, we're still going towards one team, one GNB. So there's still very many provincial partners at our committee that would have that connection building, right? And so if this concern came forward from the community and I'm reporting it to my core team and they're reporting it to, the deputy minister and so on and so forth, we're hearing that community voice through different levels of channels. And so depending on, if I've got a full committee member that's, they want to go for $25,000 or $50,000 to help support this initiative, that express a lot of community interest, and that gets the attention of government as well. So really, I look at myself as an ally, and just being able to help convene some of these conversations. We really want it to be grassroots. We want it to be region focused, and that comes from the people within the region.
Great, thanks, Carrie. I think John's gonna.
And Madam Chair, just on that, Carrie, I saw earlier in the slide that you had the Assistant Deputy Minister Committee within there referenced as well, and to that, to elevate the needs and through the local governance reform. There's been a committee created of Assistant Deputy Ministers that we can take concerns and issues and things to as well to raise that up the line. And if we're not getting resolved on issues and matters, that's kind of that group or think tank, if you will, that will help us guide through that process. So that is being happening. I think that's what you were referring to, Carrie, in your presentation as well.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, John.
Great point. Okay, well, look, thank you. If there are no further questions, thank you so much, Carrie, for that update and telling us about what you do. And we will again carry all of that in our minds as we go into our brainstorming session. So thank you. I don't know if you're staying with us. I think probably not for the rest of the meeting.
Well,
Yeah,
she's free to.
you're more than welcome to. We're doing brainstorming on what it is that our committee should be focusing on. So I think we're going to take like about a 1 minute. There's lunch has arrived. So we have food here. So everyone feel free to go help yourself to lunch. And if you're online and you want to go grab lunch, now would be your moment. And then we'll reconvene here with 2 minutes. We'll sit back down again and get back to our brainstorming because we're running a little bit behind. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to duck off for the evening, but I do really appreciate the invite for today.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
So, Madam Chair, if I could make some, some positioning comments for the brainstorming session that I was thinking about, and I had some conversations with Carrie and Suzanne about this. I think we need to understand that there's a lot happening in all of these areas already. There are people that are very committed and dedicated to their particular cause. I think that as we look at where we can add value, we need to bear in mind that we don't have to start from zero, and where are the insertion points and who are the groups and agencies that we can help and perhaps amplify their effort. And to that, that kind of references what Bob said about knowing our counterparty and what kind of structure they have and whether or not they're an entity that can contractually obligate, or if they're just a volunteer group. So that will kind of inform that. The other thing that I think that the committee might want to bear in mind and perhaps begin with, the chair talked about depth. And everyone who's spoken today, and even at our last meeting, you know, the most common thing that we discuss is capacity, sustainability, and you know, where can we focus? Because this area is so broad, and we have to recognize our constraints, and that's why we need the people who are already involved. And we need to magnify that, and we need to say to ourselves, maybe this is not something for us to do this year, for us to begin with. And with that, Madam Chair, I pass it back to you. And I'm really looking forward to being informed by what the committee has to say.
Can you discuss the mayor and CAO themes?
I can.
Before we.
Sure, I
get started?
absolutely can.
Thank you.
So, what I would say is that during our consultation period for the development of our strategic plan, staff and our consultants reached out to the chief administrative officers of the municipalities in the region and the local service manager representing the rural district, and the mayors of our communities, and looking for the themes that were important to them and important to their communities. And there are a number, and they line up to a large degree with the areas that the province identified. And they include housing and affordable housing. And you don't have to go very far into newscasts today to hear some example of challenges faced by certain groups, certain communities. It's a provincial and national issue. Mayors and CAOs were also concerned about senior care and aging in place. Healthy Community has a wide range of housing available. It has housing available for young families who are starting, and for people like me, where I now am in a big house, and my wife and I are an empty nester, and at some point we're going to look to go to something more manageable. And if we don't have that in our area, then, you know, we're going to have to relocate. No surprise, medical services and physician recruitment. Maybe we don't even have to go out of this room to find someone who doesn't have a family doctor. But if we do, we don't have to go out of this building. And it's a real challenge. And we have been able to distribute some funding to our physician recruitment communities that we have in the region. We have a board that, when they were making that decision, really questioned the need for two, and why can't we just have one? When you explore that issue, you may decide, well, we want to champion perhaps brokering a merger between those communities. I think you need to at least reflect on that. Recreation and community development, always a big issue in terms of communities trying to make sure that everyone who benefits contributes. And healthy communities have a robust infrastructure that Odell Park, the mountain biking in Grand Lake, you know, the thing is live, work, and play that we hear a lot. And so we need to satisfy those three areas. We also, the mayors and CAOs talked about a social focus and support. We are going to have responsibility in 2024 for some significant social issues. Poverty reduction, homelessness. These are very complex issues, but they are a determinant of community health. The mayor's also talked about economic development and employment, and that's important for healthy communities. I'd suggest to you that you might want to rely on the Economic Expansion Committee to do that primary focus for the region. And then finally, collaboration. Collaboration is a tough issue. People understandably are concerned about people collectively. I'm going to talk about our communities. Understandably concerned about autonomy. They want to maintain the autonomy to make decisions that are local decisions for their community. And they want to ensure that the value proposition that they are obligated to, the value is matched to the benefit that the community receives and that is fair and equitable. And that's a challenging area to address, but it's important nevertheless. So those were kind of the overall general themes that were identified, Madam Chair. I don't think they're new to anyone. I think you've all addressed those at your particular councils. And I remember my time, 10 years at the city of Fredericton. Absolutely, every one of those issues could be cast in a Ward 1 as compared to Ward 12 view. So it's, whenever you get together a collective, these are the kind of issues that collectives need to address.
Okay, thank you. And what's interesting there is that of course transportation is not mentioned, and it's one of our focuses of this committee. So if I can add to that, I'll just say I met with the community, the folks in Southeast Regional Service Commission. They have an equivalent to, so they have a SIN coordinator, community inclusion coordinator. And also they have like a director of community development and community and social development, looking ahead to when the regional service commissions take on the responsibility of social, whatever that is. Anyways, we just had this really high level meeting. I'd met their community inclusion person at FCM and we hit it off, and we thought it was a really interesting discussion. And I encouraged at the end of that discussion that it might be interesting for the community development committees across the province to meet, to see where there were opportunities for us to be working together and brainstorming, or if we're doing advocacy to the province, do it together. That I think that there's some opportunity for us to have some collaboration just for greater impact. But nevertheless, I was really interested to see how they approach their work. So I timed it to make sure we met prior to this, before our brainstorming. And thus far, they haven't, I think they haven't formally commit as a committee, but I think that they have made decisions on where they want to prioritize. And for them, it was housing, mental health, and affordability. So they put they've said that they're going to be focusing on projects that move the needle in those areas. So I thought that was interesting, quite high level, but I thought that was just an interesting approach that they had taken. So I just wanted to share that with everyone as we head into our discussion, which we're going to just sort of put things on the table and see if we can get. I'm assuming, I'm now going to leave this with you, Dawn. I think that the idea is that we will just brainstorm where we think the need is and where we think there's an opportunity for us to be helpful in advance through our committee work. And then hopefully we'll see some commonality and some themes evolve.
That's true, Madam Chair. I think I'd like to begin by reviewing some of the ground rules around brainstorming, and that there are no ideas that are inappropriate or out of scope. And if things aren't really practical, sometimes they lead to something that is, as you drill down and discuss it. So I think we should feel safe to think out loud here. We should not be shy about saying what's important to our community, and the collection of community objectives typically informs the regional one. So in any order that you like, Madam Chair, I think we should just ask the committee members what are the top issues in their community and top of mind that they think the Regional Service Commission should address.
So let's start there. And anyone, I won't do it around the table. Just raise your hand as you have ideas.
Can I just make a comment, maybe not directly answer
Sure.
the question right away, but I just was thinking as both Suzanne and Carrie were speaking about the importance of us at this table having a good understanding of all the different things that are going on. So when we're talking about what the priorities are, I guess my question is, what is our intended role in those when we have all these other organizations and groups that are already dealing with some of those issues? So to me, step one should be to understand everything that's already going on before we say this is where we should focus. It seems like we're putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit there. So I wonder if our role is more around sharing information in that advocacy piece rather than actually doing.
That's interesting.
I think that's a good point. I feel the same, that I feel as though I'm not well enough equipped to have this discussion right now. That it would be good to have a broader understanding of who's doing what, how far they're at, where things are, how we can be value added to that. I also, that being said, I also feel as though I'm not necessarily here just to represent my community, but that I'm here to represent the region. And I think that's important, because I think one of the things that we do need to do is we need a lot more collaboration, and we need to look at these as regional issues. That's why we're here, because they're regional issues. So affordability is kind of the obvious one, right? I mean, I think we may as well say it because it is. Affordability of housing is important. To me, one of the things I would like to see this committee do is to work with those in transportation to change the narrative around transportation, right? And so I come with a bias because I grew up in Toronto, right? So the TTC was my freedom, right? It was my bicycle. I had a bicycle, but that would only get me so far. But if I wanted to get anywhere else, I used the transit system. Transit system was a great, and what we saw at the symposium is that people who come from other parts of the world here, they're looking for a great transit system. And then they get here and they're like, what the heck? I can't take a train from here to there. I can't get a bus, so that'll take me, so I think we need to change the narrative, because I think our chair pointed out that it isn't even on the list of what mayors and CAOs are looking at. And I think the reason it's not on the list is because the mayors and CAOs all have cars and they just drive wherever they want, right? And they don't think about that stuff. And I think about, sorry, I'm rambling here, but what I think about is how I used to have to go and pick my kid up, after university when she'd been to the bar, right? And she's like, Dad, can you come pick me up? I can only get the bus as far as Kingswood, like those sorts of things, right? And I think of all those parents, we've created this car culture that I think we have an opportunity to maybe have a little bit of impact on. It's a massive, massive issue, but we have this car culture that parents, I don't know how you can be a parent today. You're driving your kid here, there, the next place, right? And the kid, I can't get there if you don't drive me, right? Well, I want to say BS, because you can get places if you have transportation and you're willing to use the transportation. I think there's this whole narrative that we need to be involved in, changing that perception of public transportation, that it isn't just for folks who have low income and can't afford a car. I mean, that's a big part of who we support, but it's not the only thing, right? And our transportation in terms of urban rural rides, I'm the only driver in Handel. So we talk about sustainability. If Tim's sick or Tim has a meeting that day, we have no driver, right? So looking at how we implement these things is important. And again, I think we can't completely depend on volunteers to make this happen.
By the way, and I'll agree. So I have number one on my list, affordability too. If I were, I think, because I think affordability captures a lot of things. And even when we look at housing and affordability of housing, you can afford a lot more housing if you're not spending $10,000 to $12,000 a year in a vehicle, because that's what it costs. By the time you do the car payment, the insurance, the gas, you remove that from the equation, it very much changes what your housing costs look like. So it resonates with me. Like my overall approach would be, how do we keep our region more affordable for the people who live in our region? When I think of Fredericton, our competitive advantage used to be our cheap housing market relative to the rest of Canada. Well, we're every year that is narrowing, that competitive advantage is narrowing. Starter homes in Fredericton last year it was 342. The first 6 months of this year, I think it's gone up to 370 something. It's a starter home. My children will never be able to afford that, but they're much more likely to be able to afford it if they don't need a car. And so I would like us to, if this committee was able to grapple some of the things that contribute, and food security. Food security is the greatest challenge there is people are having to make decisions. They have to pay their rent. They can get food maybe through the benevolence of other people, but that's not sustainable. So I think so many of the things that we work on as a region could be captured under affordability. And if we just target what those are, for me, that might be a neat way, but I'm contributing just like every other committee member. I don't want, my voice is not to have more weight. It's just, that's how my thinking is forming too. So I think it's really in line too with you, Tim, you know, so we have others though. I see Amy's hand, your hand's up.
Sure. So after the last meeting, I couldn't attend, but I did watch the video, and the list of priorities was quite broad. And one of the things that came to mind for me, as I've been talking to people from other countries who are relatively new to Fredericton, and the area generally, and what they're telling me is that they don't want to live in a rural community because of the issue of transportation. Because what we know is that it's not just a matter of having one car. You really almost have to have a 2-car home, because when you have one vehicle, the other person goes into the city to run errands, and they spend a lot of their resources. So time they could be taking care of their home, time they could be resting, doing all kinds of social activities, and they're sitting in a car waiting on their cell phone, waiting for their kids to get done something, or they're sitting in a coffee shop wasting money, waiting for their partner to finish work. So there's all these kind of things that are disincentives for folks to come out into rural areas, including just not having enough density of cultural services. So people want to go to places where, you know, other folks are speaking their language and there's food available and that kind of thing. And so I thought, while those kind of services around diversity and inclusion and things are very important overall, I don't see them as being really priorities for rural communities until we can solve the housing and the transportation issue. So if we were to narrow our projects down, I would push those until the sort of the next round. The second thing that I'm concerned about, so I guess when I signed up to participate in these meetings, I had thought that they would be evening meetings. And a meeting from 11 to 1 makes it so that most of the folks that are counselors can't be here. So I happen to work 20 hours a week, so I just rework my work schedule to be here. But a lot of the folks on our council are, you know, they're teachers and they're small business owners, and they're doing 40 hours a week elsewhere. So I think if we want to get rural voices from throughout the region, we have to be thoughtful about how things happen and how people can actually participate.
Thanks for that comment, Amy. I'll just share from the committee's perspective that everyone who was here at the last meeting, we did a poll, and the choice was to meet through the day. So that's how that happened, but I totally hear what you're saying. So we'll take that into account. But it's just a reflection. We met in our last meeting was an evening meeting, and people expressed a preference to meet through the day. But I think for all the reasons you mentioned, we should be rethinking that. I'm also going to add on, I'm going to use my chair role. The stuff you said about diversity and all of that, our anti-racism task force, I don't know if I've shared this with this group. So Fredericton has an anti-racism task force, met with council, and we started with if you could change one thing in Fredericton to make your racialized experience of the city improve, what would it be? Every single one of them said transit. We were expecting everything under the sun. None of us expected transit. And they said most of them are here unable to afford a vehicle. They also, many come from countries where they and their children starting at very, very young ages take public transit on their own. And they all said they feel so isolated because they can't get to where it is that they need to go. We were shocked, especially the guy who's the head of our transit system, because I think he felt the pressure. So I think that point about inclusion, to generate inclusion, how the need to move around effectively is important. Okay, who else? We haven't made them all. Any ideas?
Well, affordability is there, and there's in my case, affordability has kind of two faces. One of them is the cost of everything today, and we have a little project in Millville, and it's a building. It's around the recreation area, and there's a little building to be built, which is the roof is 22 feet long, but the building part that has four sides to it is only about half of that. And it's about 12 feet wide on a cement pad. The roof goes a little bit longer. Underneath there's a couple of picnic tables and a place for a barbecue. And when we went out to tender, it was over $300,000. And even the councillor from Millville said, it just blows them away. How can you do that? So that is impacting. It's the cost of everything. We have another thing. We have two sewage treatment plants. There's a tiny one that I thought could be fixed, made whole again, for $150,000, and it's going to ruin $1 million. And the other phase of it is behavior of the government. And 2014, a number of mills in New Brunswick went to the government for assistance. Unfortunately, the current premier was the Minister of Finance then, and they had a great solution for them, for the mill and aggregate. We can help your bottom line by lowering your property tax. It cost us a third of our revenue. And since that time, there hasn't been a street paved in that. And so when I got on council again, they were saying, now you must do this asset management plan. So we worked with two guys that worked in the city in the office. So we developed the asset management plan. The annual cost matched within $100 what we lost from 2014. $500,000 a year was what it was cost to properly use your assets and replace them, et cetera, et cetera. And it was ironic that it was almost exactly the same as what we lost in 2014. And so I look at it as our contribution to the mill. And so far we're up to about $5 million. So because our taxpayers are doing that. So it's, I think, irresponsible decision-making sometimes by strong people in government who don't even bother to ask how will this impact you. So we've been, and that's why we've been working so hard on waterfront development, by the way, is we have to try to rebuild that revenue. But since then we've got reform, and that brings us the other thing, and it's related to affordability, is staffing. small communities, like, we could only probably take on a few of these things in a small way. Because we just don't have the staff and the expertise. And which is part of the reason why RSC is very valuable to us. And Lonnie Forbes is worth his weight in gold to us.
I agree.
Yes.
And,
I don't
So,
know who that is.
but,
Is our,
so, and when it comes to something else,
Manager.
there's two things, the quality of the roads in our greater area. And we took the advice on the white paper, I think it was, we established. We had meetings with, 3 parts of DTI. And, because I chair the Public Works Committee. So we met with 3 of them and we identified what we consider to be very important in terms of road repair. And we've only seen one section that has received the attention that we spoke of. Now, maybe it'll take a year because they have plans ahead of time as well. And maybe it'll be next year before we start seeing some work relative to what we thought was needs. And we had great meetings. I mean, they're all great people and so on. But the quality of the roads are the rural roads are not good. And housing is the other thing that I think we would.
I'm sorry, I have to leave for another
No,
meeting.
I understand we were to be done at 1, so we'll continue on though, but thanks, Tim. Do you have any parting words or? You
No,
feel
my
you got made your
preference is day
contribution?
meetings.
Okay.
And if we do go evenings, every second and third Wednesday are council.
Mhm.
And Thursdays are not great, but
Okay,
I would
okay,
work around whatever.
thanks. Thank you, Tim, for your
Thanks.
Thanks.
contributions. And who else? So Tim, you don't have your hand up, but do you have thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I did just want to say that everything that Tim said, I agree with, because I grew up in Toronto as well, and the transit system was invaluable. But in New Maryland, we've sort of resigned ourselves to the fact that you have to have a car to live in New Maryland. We've looked at the school bus thing or the mini bus, and there's nothing that's feasible or really possible right now. And in a survey of the residents, they didn't really put that as a priority because everyone's got a car or 2. And so we just drive ourselves. And I'd love it if we had some kind of train system because I'm a fan of trains, but that's not going to happen. We look at it every year, it seems, and it's for as long as I've been on council, and there's no really great idea. So something comes out of this committee, that would be great, and I'd be a hero. So help me out, and I'd love to take something back, and I'll give you the ideas of the village if we've got some, but we've been unsuccessful so far. And that's it for me for that.
Any other areas? So I guess we're thinking of areas of focus for this committee. So and we've had a few, so Don, I'm gonna look to you, see, are you getting?
I am, Madam Chair, by way of perhaps a premature summary, I think what we're hearing from the committee that they would like to see from staff a program to sort of bring us up to date on what's happening in our region in these areas already. And the thought that I had with respect to that was perhaps a series of lunch and learns for the committee. We can bring in those groups that are active in the areas that you're interested in, transportation, affordability, and you know, I've got other notes here as well. GFSI is an organization that I think that would probably be a good agency to listen to in terms of where we might add value, even though they're supposed to be focused on Greater Fredericton. I know that they're have been even active outside of those borders, and we don't want to duplicate that. I also heard, I think I'm hearing that advocacy is very important to this group in terms of trying to encourage our senior level of government here to be more attentive to our on the ground needs.
Mhm.
And so perhaps at a larger meeting of the board, a workshop of the board, we could develop a hot issues list and a priority on them, and we could start to develop position papers that we could present. I've heard about amplifying the voice of the communities. What I haven't heard really is an answer to or an opinion upon depth, and it deals with the capacity issue. So at some point, we're going to have to ask the very difficult questions of this means not that, right? And I guess my thinking is that to do that rationally, we really need to hear from staff with respect to all of the things that Suzanne has, where the contrast of other RSCs, where they may be with respect to transportation. And I know that the CEOs meet regularly on that regard. I'm intrigued by maybe the community, we could perhaps host a symposium of other community development committees from around the province.
Mhm.
And maybe we want to talk to our counterparts in other regions about where they are in this process. And candidly, I think we've got a full list of things that we can work on in terms of trying to
Yeah.
inform our next meeting.
Mhm.
And we will at that time, over the intervening period, we will do that analysis of E6 annual report and send that to you. Not surprised to hear some of the people comment on the fact that their approach is too wide and too shallow.
Mhm.
And we need, it would be nice to talk about that before John has to sit down with Stefan and sort of finalize an agreement for next year for overcoming poverty 4.
I would say they've also addressed symptoms, and I can say that having worked quite closely with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
group. I mean, those community inclusion coordinators are so hardworking, and I wouldn't be able to, I think, keep my eye on
No.
my fingers on the pulse of all the things that they're expected to, because they, for a variety of reasons, some of which are quite political and intergovernmental machination stuff, approach symptoms. So like food security is a symptom of poverty, as
Right.
opposed to really tackling poverty, right? And I know why it's done. It's done because it's incentivized through project funding. And so you can only give project funding to a symptom. You certainly can't make a systemic change through project funding. Like there's lots of reasons why that's happened. But if we're thinking we want depth, not breadth, then we do need to be rethinking I would say the arrangement, our
Mhm.
relationship with ESIC and coming up with indicators, identifying areas, setting key performance indicators,
Right.
all of that kind of stuff.
We really did get with everything that needed to be addressed in local government reform. We didn't have an opportunity to do what I would say negotiate an agreement with ESIC. We were takers, we were price takers, we were service takers. And it would be nice in this next round to be makers in terms of making a price and making priorities and addressing our capacity, making sure it fits within our capacity.
Does this approach sort of make sense the folks. It's really in line, I think that like right off the bat, response to that initial suggestion, which is excellent. I think we can still get to affordability and then even transportation, which were the other two things that we
Right.
talked about. Yes, Amy.
I think the approach to creating more depth is good. The one thing that I would say that I really hope that we don't get into are paying for loads of consultant fees. I mean, white papers can be created probably, but with CRSC staff. But I would really think we'd be remiss to have another report or another survey. I think we have all the information that we need to move forward. Thank
Yeah.
you.
That is an excellent point. I 100% agree. 100%. We have, this process has lined a lot of consultants' pockets. So no,
Well, it didn't line my
not
pockets.
like yours, but it had, like, it
Yeah.
really has.
Yeah.
Which I guess is economic development, but I think you're right. We probably have all the information we need to know. Like, we have all the people who have the knowledge we need. We just need to compile. I think that's an awesome point, Amy. Not that you need me to think it's an awesome point. I just happen to agree with you. So anyone else want to weigh in? Did we capture some of the stuff we were talking about? Okay, and Tim, everyone's good? Because we'll move, I was thinking we were gonna need much longer for that, so the fact that we didn't, I just want to make sure that everyone feels they had a chance to chime in. It would appear, so next steps, I think, how do we want, I will say, my understanding as part of this meeting is to doing these overviews was somewhat to set us up for this discussion.
Yes.
But I think what we're hearing from the group is that we feel now a need to dig into some of
Yeah.
what was presented today.
Well, and honestly, you gotta, what my mother used to call a lick and a promise, right? I mean, it's very deep, and so what we try to do is put transportation, our existing partnerships before you to try and inform the discussion. And not surprisingly, Suzanne's stuff, I mean, we could have a day here and we wouldn't cover it all.
I know.
Well, with respect to that, I've already made notes that our council has to invite the wellness committee,
Right,
Peter Farnsworth to come in and bring the council up to date
right,
on a lot of those things like food security.
Yeah.
Transportation and some and recreation and so on. So the council knows what's happening, and if there's a way we can contribute to it. So that's what I'm taking back with me.
yeah, good.
Along with my plan on flooding.
Yeah. I like that.
That's something that's province-wide, really.
Yeah.
And if I could get a pilot project going for our area, it'd be perfect. That would inform the government what it's gonna cost them, even if they just do the desk work on it.
So I guess next steps are setting our next meeting.
Right.
Where we'll delve into this more. When you talked about having a lunch hour series.
Lunch and learn.
A
Yeah.
lunch and learn, that is separate from what our next meeting would be.
Yeah, I think so. Well, actually, I'm not sure that we might not need a couple lunch and learns to prepare for the next meeting.
Okay,
And I'd like to have an opportunity to reflect on that and reach out to you, Madam Chair. At a mutually convenient time, maybe if we could get together for half an hour or so, it would help.
okay,
It would help me anyway.
sounds good. So I think then what we'll do, as opposed to scheduling a next meeting today, we'll probably, Dawn and I will meet and kind of brainstorm a little bit on what that lunch and learn series looks like, as well as what our next committee meeting looks like. And then we'll get Kelly to send out maybe a doodle poll.
Yeah.
And we'll pick a time. Maybe to honor everyone's sort of interests, we'll do a little bit of maybe occasional day, occasional evening. I don't know how people feel. Whatever people want to meet. So I don't know what the general consensus
Oh, something else that Kelly can pull.
Okay.
when we-
We'll pull.
Yeah.
I want everyone to feel happy about the meeting time, but I think that people have different interests at play, so we'll get Kelly to pull that. And we'll look at something maybe late August. We'll be able to grab a group the last week of August. If not, I would suggest it after school, after that school week. So anyway, stay tuned.
Yep.
And thank you, everyone. If does anyone, anything else before we adjourn?
No, I'm good.
Okay, if not, meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Interesting. I was.
Little bit of